Welcome to this video tutorial on how to import custom objects and assets into your files in Twinmotion. To begin with, I've just created a new scene in Twinmotion and I'm just going to delete out some of these starting objects that I don't need to work with, just to give us a kind of base plate to apply and add in our custom objects to. Now for this particular tutorial, I've got a few different photo scans that I've created here of some kind of rocky landscapes, and I want to bring these into my file. Often Twinmotion has a lot of pre-made assets that you can get in within the software, but if you want something kind of very particular or a custom scan that you've done, there are other ways you can bring those in and start to use them in the file. So to do this, we're just going to start by going down to the Import tab here. We're going to click on the plus setting, and instead of doing a direct link, we're going to select the geometry setting here and click on Open. First, we're going to find the geometry we want to bring in, so I'm going to start just with this rocks number 1 here, and we're going to hit Open there. Under the options, for now we're just going to leave these as they are, because the default options are usually good when bringing in these type of objects. Then we're going to hit Import. Now this will load in the data into our scene. Now what might happen is, depending on where you got the object from, whether it was a photo scan or you modelled it, the scale might be slightly off and it might be slightly different to what's set up in Twinmotion. As you can see here, I've brought my object in, but I can't see it at all. It seems to be invisible or kind of not visible in the scene. Now we can find it if we go down to our scene graph, find that kind of rock number 1, and here my object is sitting in that folder. If I select it, it will select my object, and I can kind of see that it's there, but it looks like it's just really tiny. So usually what happens is you might have an object brought in from a photo scan. It might be really small in the scene. To change this, I'm just going to select the scale option here. I'm going to hover over that central point of the axis and just type in 100 into my scale there, and that will scale it up 100 times. Then I'm going to hit the F key just to focus on that object, and there you can see I've got my nice kind of photo scan of my rocks here. Now we're going to try bringing in a couple of other objects into this scene, and sometimes when you're bringing in multiple objects you might have a few error messages that pop up, and we're just going to go through what some of those might look like. So again, I'm going to go back to the Import tab, click on the plus, go to Geometry, open that up, and this time we're going to try this rocks number 2 here, and I'm going to just select this 3D data there and hit Import. Now there we go, we can see that rocks has dropped in nicely, and what we might find is, now if we select that object again, I'm just going to go in and scale it up by 100. You might find this kind of happens, and the object is actually coming in. If we just rotate around slightly here, focus in, it's coming in kind of flipped around on its axis. It's actually kind of flipped on that y-axis by 90 degrees. Now this is a common thing that can happen, especially with OBJ objects, as they often get the kind of y-axis flipped and you end up bringing in objects with a slightly different rotation. Now if you're just using it as a single object, that's fine, because you can just rotate it and use it. But if you start to scatter these, you'll find that actually that rotation kind of stays true when scattering them. They'll all be the wrong way around, and it won't really help when you're trying to make bigger scenes. So if this happens, you can't actually kind of change that object properties directly in Twinmotion, but you can in a software like Rhino. So usually what I'll do is I'll quickly open up Rhino, and you can see I kind of brought this in previously, and we'll do it again here. I'm just going to click Import, find that 3D data, open it in, select OK there. Then I'm just going to rotate that around in my Rhino file, make sure it's the right way up, and just holding down the Shift key to lock that in. Once it's the right way, I'm just going to go File, Export Selected, select it as Rocks 2 this time, click Save, and then under the formatting, and this is the important part, make sure that this box here, Map Rhino Z to OBJY, is unticked. This will make sure that it actually comes in the right way and isn't flipped around as normally happens with OBJs. Then we hit OK, go back into our Twinmotion file, and then again let's import this in, hit Open, rocks number 2, hit Import and bring that in. Now this should be correctly flipped. What you also might find when you're bringing in multiple objects is you might get this little kind of material conflict window that pops up. This happens if you've kind of brought in objects and they just happen to have the same material name. This can often happen if you're using the same program or same kind of software to create the object in the first place, and it has a default material name that it gives that object. What you should do in this case is always use imported material. This makes sure that the object you're bringing in is getting its material from that sort of import settings rather than using an existing material in the scene. If you click on that, it might then end up overlapping two materials together, and then you're going to end up with objects with incorrect materials and things looking funny. So always use imported material to make sure that the materials stay correct for your objects. We're going to hit OK there. So now we've loaded that in. Again, let's go and locate that rocks 2 here. We're going to scale it up, and there we can see that our object is nice and kind of at the right orientation, which is good for using within our scene. So we're not going to end up with weirdly orientated objects as we bring them around. So there we've got kind of our two photo scans in our scene, and they're kind of looking quite nice. They're being lit up already by Twinmotion's kind of built-in lighting system here. But what you might want to do is you might want to actually kind of use these in other scenes later on, or start to use them with some of Twinmotion's scatter plugins and other tools that you're using for scattering lots of these objects in the scene. Now we can actually create a user library which can save a lot of these objects in that we can use them again. And we can find this just down in our library on the left under this user library tab. From here, I'm going to just click the plus button. We're going to make a new category. I'm going to right click on that, and let's just call that rocks for this tutorial here. What we're then going to do is we're going to save both of these objects in that rocks category. Now before I do that, I'm just going to give the objects a name. You can see they just come in as default to start with, and it's fine for this scene because I know what they are, but if I want to use them again in other scenes I might forget what that actually is, so always good just to give it a name, something that you'll remember it by, and something that's unique to that object as well. So let's just call this rock 1 and rock 2. From there we're just going to select rock 1, click on these sort of 3 dots here for these options, and then go add to user library. And once you do that, you'll see it drops it in to the user library there. We're going to do the same here for the second one, add to user library. So then we've got both of those rocks saved in our library here. Now what we can do with this is we can actually start to use it with some of Twinmotion's preset sort of scattering options. So if we go to this Populate tab here, I'm just going to zoom along. We're going to click place, and we're going to use the paint scatter. Let's just drag in this rocks number 2 in here. Now I'm going to make the diameter a lot smaller here, and just a sort of word of caution when using these. Often in Twinmotion, a lot of the preset assets in the software are kind of downsized, so they're quite low resolution. So when you scatter them, they don't crash your computer, and it can kind of handle dealing with all of that geometry. These particular assets are photo scans, and it might be that you've created your assets in a similar way, or you've kind of modeled lots and lots of detail on them before you brought them in. If you do that, Twinmotion doesn't automatically downsize them for you, so if you start to scatter them, like I'm about to do here, it's going to be scattering tons and tons and thousands of vertices of geometry in your scene, which is going to get really tricky to load, and if you do too much, it will crash the scene very quickly. So I'd always use this with caution. As you see, as I'm going to start scattering this here, I'm just going to click just with my mouse key just to place them in the scene here, rather than trying to kind of paint them a lot more. And usually what I'll do is just paint a couple in there. I'm just going to click back on the rocks, and I'm going to lower that density right down so we haven't got too many there. Now sometimes depending on the object, you'll find that it might be sort of slightly below the surface of my terrain here. We can also try it with my other object here, so let's try again with this second rocks 1 on that sort of paint tool, and again here you can kind of see them dropping in there and scattering across the scene. So you can use this to sort of scatter up any particular type of object you want. You can tweak the density of that so we can have a few less of them, and very quickly you can start to create scenes with these objects that start to sort of put them in the file in certain ways, kind of adding them in, creating these sort of new landscapes, which might be a mixture of your custom built assets and other assets in the scene as well. So I hope you found that video tutorial useful. That's just a quick video on how to add in custom assets into your scenes in Twinmotion and start to use these to create your custom landscapes or any other pieces of geometry that you want to make. If you want to watch any other videos on rendering or creating scenes in Twinmotion and Rhino, please do check out the videos on the channel. Thanks for watching.